Christmas is supposed to be warm lights and soft voices, not a daughter's voice like broken glass. The greatest gift you can give us is to stop being a freeloader and disappear. I stood in the doorway with a paper bag of small presents bought from careful coupons and a December of hope, and felt a life's worth of love buckle in my ribs. I did not argue. I did not plead. I gathered my things, set my key on the table where I once helped with homework, and closed the door so gently the click sounded like a verdict out in the cold. The house glowed with its perfect garlands and perfect people. A snow globe I no longer belonged to. I loaded my old suitcase into a car that still smelled faintly of my late husband's aftershave, and drove without aim through streets that remembered me better than my family did. A motel took me in for the night-thin towels, thicker silence. In that scratchy bed, I replayed the evening like a cruel holiday film, my daughter's dress that cost more than my groceries for months, my son-in-law's smirk over prime rib, my grandchildren gazing into their screens as if I were a buffering ad. I had always told myself that presence was a kind of contribution. I had babysat, cooked, mended, held, but under those cheap lights, a harsher sentence wrote itself across my chest. They did not want what I had to give. Morning arrived in unkind brightness, and the motel's coffee tasted like regret. I took stock, a thin wallet, a thinning list of people I could call, and the sudden ache of having nowhere to set a kettle and call it mine. I looked at my reflection gray threaded through my hair, grief's small cuts around my eyes, and realized how long I had been measuring myself against their impatience. My phone buzzed. For an instant, I imagined my grandson's apology, my daughter's change of heart. It was the bank, informing me my balance was nearly gone. Yesterday, I had counted the dollars like prayer beads. Today, they had vanished. My hands shook as I opened the app and scrolled. An unfamiliar ATM, a withdrawal I did not make, a time that placed me squarely at my daughter's table, swallowing humiliation while my account was being emptied a few blocks away. I spoke to a tired voice at the bank who explained procedures and PINs in several weeks. Several weeks when I had a handful of bills and a room that reeked of disinfectant. After the call ended, I did not cry. I sat still and let a colder, cleaner feeling settle in my body clarity. I pulled out the thin folder I kept for important papers, more for the comfort of neatness than any expectation they would ever matter. There were the ordinary markers of a modest life, Social Security letters, Medicare notes, and then, tucked behind like a forgotten photograph, the deed to the house I used to call mine, in the churn of funeral casseroles and condolence cards. My daughter had promised to handle everything, and I had signed where she placed my hand. The deed still recorded my name with hers, a lifeline I hadn't known I still held. But further back, more papers, a quitclaim deed bearing my signature from 1.5 years ago, granting my half for the sum of $1 and other valuable consideration. I did not remember this moment. I would not have forgotten giving away the last shelter of my marriage. Yet the shape of my name curled in ink that looked like mine. And nausea climbed my throat as if the ink were still wet. Pieces aligned themselves with slow, brutal logic, the cutting speech at dinner, the timed withdrawal, the years of subtle shaming that recast my help as dependence and their taking as generosity. I remembered how often my daughter had stood beside me at the ATM, one manicured finger tapping impatience on the counter while I entered my PIN. I remembered her laughter the night before, bright and sharp, as if the breaking were a relief. You can lose a home twice, once in the body and once in the law. I had lost both. But clarity is also a kind of shelter. I opened the laptop my husband had insisted I needed to stay connected to the world, and for the first time, it connected me to my own resolve. I searched elder financial abuse attorney and wrote down names until I found one that repeated in reviews with a single phrase, "does not lose." The office felt like a world where rules still worked, leather chairs, steady lights, a woman with quick eyes who treated my papers as evidence rather than family squabbles. She asked me if I remembered signing the quitclaim and did not flinch when I said no. She held my signature beneath a glass and said the words that placed my muddled grief inside a frame, "deception is still fraud." She asked if I understood that the path ahead would be costly, not only in money I did not have, but in the weary currency of courage. I looked at the emptying of my account, at the closed door on Christmas, at the motel shampoo with its unforgivable lemon, and realized I had already paid most of the price. "We would start with records," she said. "People who steal from blood often forget that ink has a longer memory," while her assistant moved like a pianist through public databases. The stories I had told myself about my daughter's stress, about my supposed freeloading, about gratitude for scraps began to sound like lullabies for an adult who had been taught to sleep through her own alarms. The attorney returned with a stack of printouts that made my throat burn. The quitclaim was the doorway. Beyond it lay loans, refinances, signatures nested in signatures, and a pattern as obvious as tinsel in daylight. My house had been turned into a cash machine that ran on my trust. A tremor of sorrow ran through me. Sorrow for the child I had raised to be warm and ended up watching grow cold. Sorrow for the woman I had become who mistook endurance for love. But the sorrow did not drown me. It clarified me. My daughter had wanted me to disappear. I would. But into my own life, not into her comfort. The attorney asked what I wanted if we could prove everything. "Justice," I said, "independence, and a meeting where my daughter had to say my name while she learned what it costs to forget what a mother is." The following days blurred into equal parts dread and adrenaline as I gathered the tatters of my life into neat files. Each grocery receipt, each letter from Social Security, each scrap of proof that I had not been the burden my daughter painted me to be was placed carefully into manila folders. For years I had shrunk myself to avoid confrontation. But now, the act of organization felt like sharpening blades. Every paper was a reminder that I had lived, worked, raised, contributed, and that she had stolen not from a week-old woman, but from a life hard-earned. The attorney's investigation peeled back layers of betrayal like wallpaper from a damp wall. 6 months after the fraudulent deed, my daughter and her husband had pulled a massive loan against the house. 3 months later, they refinanced again, stacking debt on deception until the numbers exceeded $500,000. $500,000 money siphoned from the home where my late husband and I had painted the nursery, where we had grilled hot dogs on summer nights, where I had believed our family's roots would always be safe. Instead, those walls had been hollowed out to fund Marcus's consulting business, which had already failed. And now, the house itself teetered on the edge of foreclosure. They had not just betrayed me, they had gambled away their children's roof, all while blaming me for being the weight that dragged them down. The attorney explained calmly, though her eyes betrayed disgust, that my daughter had also claimed me as a dependent on her taxes for years. The irony tasted bitter while I struggled to make rent. She had profited from the illusion of my helplessness. She had weaponized my widowhood and then humiliated me for it. Fraud, theft, tax evasion, the list grew longer until even I struggled to believe one person could do so much to someone they once called mom. At night, The silence of my small apartment hummed with memories. I would picture my daughter at 7 years old, hair tangled from sleep, slipping into my bed during thunderstorms whispering, "Don't let go." I had held her then with every ounce of love I owned. And now, she had let go of me with deliberate cruelty, dismissing me as a freeloader in front of her children and my sister. The ache of that memory pressed against my ribs like broken glass. But intertwined with the ache was something unexpected strength. The law was on my side, and for once, I was not powerless. When the attorney asked if I wanted to press criminal charges or negotiate, I surprised myself. I did not want a courtroom war that dragged on for years, but neither did I want to walk away. What I wanted was recognition, restitution, and the sharp satisfaction of seeing my daughter understand what her choices had cost. We would demand $150,000 in restitution, an amount that covered the value of my stolen equity, the money siphoned from my accounts, and the years of financial abuse. It was a sum she could not ignore, one that would force her to sell the very house she had stolen from me to repay what she owed. The first sign that our strategy struck fear came in the form of missed calls. My daughter rang the attorney's office repeatedly, asking what we planned to do. She had never called me, not once, since throwing me out. But now she sensed the tide turning. The attorney told her nothing beyond the truth we were investigating elder financial abuse, a crime that could carry prison time. That was enough. Within days, she agreed to a meeting the night before that confrontation. I drove past the house that had once been mine. Christmas lights still clung to the eaves, though the holiday had long passed, their cheerful blinking like a cruel reminder of the night everything fractured. Through the window, I saw silhouettes moving around the dining table, no doubt arguing about money, debts, and the foreclosure notice that must have landed by now. For a moment, I sat in the car clutching the steering wheel, my chest tight with grief. This was the home where I had decorated birthday cakes, where I had bandaged scraped knees, where I had believed love lived. Now it was simply a stage for lies. I drove away before memory could drown me. The next day, I met my grandson Jake in a coffee shop. He had texted me quietly, asking if we could see each other. He looked older than 15, worry weighing down his young shoulders. He apologized for his mother's cruelty, his eyes wide with guilt that was not his to carry. I held his hand across the table and told him none of it was his fault, that children are never responsible for adult choices. He whispered that his parents were whispering constantly, fighting about money, blaming me for their troubles. I wanted to tell him the whole truth, to unveil the fraud and theft, but he was still a child. Instead, I told him that families sometimes break under pressure, but that my love for him and his sister would never waver. When he asked if I was homeless, I smiled and said I had a place of my own, even if it was small. His relief nearly broke me. After he left, I called my attorney with a steady voice. I wanted to make the offer, but I wanted to deliver it in person. She warned me it would be unusual, that most clients preferred to let lawyers speak, but I was done with silence. I wanted my daughter to hear me, see me, know that I was no longer the woman she could bully into submission. 3 days later, we sat across a conference table, the air heavy with unspoken history. My daughter looked smaller than I remembered, her usual arrogance cracked by sleepless nights. Her lawyer shuffled papers nervously. My attorney presented the settlement $150,000, payable over 5 years, in exchange for avoiding criminal charges. My daughter's face drained of color. She shrieked about impossibility, about sacrifices she had made, about how she had taken care of me. I listened in silence until the moment came when I spoke with a voice I hardly recognized, calm, steady, undeniable. I told her it had been my money, my house, my life, and I wanted it back. Her protestations echoed against the polished walls of the conference room, but I refused to flinch. For years I had swallowed my words, bent myself into silence, and accepted blame that was not mine. Now it was her turn to be cornered by truth. My attorney spread out the documents one by one, the fraudulent quitclaim deed, the records of loans and refinances, the corporate filings of Marcus's failed business. Each sheet of paper was a mirror she could not avoid. Her lawyer grew pale as he skimmed through the evidence, whispering questions she could not answer. When the tax records appeared, even he could not conceal his disgust. "You claimed your mother as a dependent while charging her to live in what was legally her house," he asked flatly. My daughter's eyes darted to me, then back to the lawyer, her mouth opening and closing like a drowning swimmer. She muttered excuses about confusion, grief, and responsibility. But the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. For the first time in years, I saw fear in her, not the fear of a child who once clung to me in thunderstorms, but the fear of an adult realizing that lies had run out of road. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "You wanted me to disappear, Ara. But what will disappear now is the life you built on my back." Her lawyer requested time to consider the settlement, but my attorney was immovable 24 hours. After that, criminal charges. The meeting ended with my daughter reaching for my arm, begging for a private word. I shook her hand off gently but firmly. "Whatever you need to say can be said in front of the lawyers." She insisted she loved me, that mistakes had been made, that she had only ever wanted to hold her family together. I looked at her mascara-streaked face and saw only panic, not remorse. "Love is proven by what you do," I told her, "and your actions have been clear." I walked away, leaving her in silence. That night, I lay awake in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling. I had expected vindication, maybe even triumph, but instead, I felt empty. The daughter I had raised, the little girl who once baked cookies by my side and made birthday cards out of glitter, was gone. In her place stood a stranger who had stolen from me without hesitation. Perhaps she had always been capable of such cruelty, and I had simply never seen it because she never needed to show it. The thought gnawed at me, but there was no escaping it. At 11:47 p.m., the phone rang. My daughter's voice cracked with exhaustion. She said she would sign. I answered simply, "All right." She begged for more absolution, forgiveness, something to soften the consequences, but I had nothing left to give. "I believe you're sorry you got caught." I told her, "That's not the same as being sorry for what you did." There was a long silence before she asked if I would ever forgive her. "I don't know," I said truthfully, and ended the call. 3 days later, in the same office, she signed every page of the agreement. Her hand trembled, her eyes rimmed red, but she did not resist. The terms were clear: the house would be sold within 90 days, and I would receive $85,000 from the proceeds. The remaining $65,000 would come in monthly payments of $1,200 over 5 years. If she missed a single payment, the full amount would become due and I could pursue criminal charges. She did not argue. Her lawyer managed to secure one concession after the house sale. they would be left with just enough for a deposit on a modest apartment. I did not object. I was not seeking to destroy her completely, only to ensure she could never hurt me again. As we left the office, she approached me in the hallway, her voice desperate. She said Emma and Jake missed me, that they didn't understand why I was gone, that she had told them only there had been disagreements about money. She begged me not to punish them for her mistakes. For a moment, the mother in me ached, but I had learned too well how quickly compassion could be twisted into permission for further harm. I told her the truth. She was still lying to protect herself, not her children. Then I walked away. 2 months later, I stood in the garden of a small cottage I had purchased with the first payment. The air smelled of soil and tomato plants, and for the first time in nearly a decade, the ground beneath my feet felt solid. It was mine. No one could tell me I did not belong here. When Jake appeared at the gate with a shy smile and a wrapped gift, my heart nearly broke with gratitude. He had found me through my old neighbor. He gave me a framed photo of us laughing together the Christmas morning before everything fell apart. Not everything about our family was bad, he said quietly. Tears burned my eyes as I hugged him tight. We sat on the porch swing, talking about school, baseball, and his sister learning to drive, for 2 hours. I felt like a grandmother again, not a burden, not a victim. When he left, I told him my cottage would always be a safe place for him and Emma. That promise lit something warm in both of us. Payments arrived on time each month. My attorney confirmed them, but I hardly cared about the numbers anymore. It was never about money alone. It was about dignity, about reclaiming the pieces of myself I had been told were worthless. My daughter kept her distance, which was exactly what I wanted. Months passed. Emma visited too. Timid at first, then more comfortable as she realized I would not force her to take sides. We baked cookies, talked about her college dreams, and sat together in simple peace. She confided that her mother cried often, that the weight of her choices seemed to press harder each day. I told Emma gently that forgiveness is complicated, that sometimes people damage trust beyond repair. But I assured her that my love for her and Jake was unshakable. Seasons shifted around my little cottage, and with them, my life softened into something I had thought was lost forever. I tended the garden each morning, brewed tea in the afternoons, and welcomed the occasional knock at the gate from Jake or Emma. Their visits filled the quiet with laughter that sounded like redemption, for the first time in years. I was not bracing for the next harsh word or judgmental glance. I was simply living, and it was enough. Then, one spring afternoon, my sister Dorothy appeared at my door. She looked older, wearier, guilt shadowing her face. I had not spoken to her since that Christmas night when she looked away as my daughter cut me down. She sat stiffly in my living room, tea trembling in her hands. Before blurting out the apology I had waited for without even realizing it, she admitted she had been a coward, that she had chosen silence because it was easier than standing against the tide. She told me my daughter had called her recently, confessing the truth at last, sobbing about the house and the money and the settlement. Dorothy's voice cracked as she admitted she was ashamed of herself for not protecting me. I listened quietly. Her words could not undo the wound of that night, but they mattered. One moment of betrayal did not erase a lifetime of sisterhood, and part of me still longed for the bond we once shared. I told her we could try, but it would be different now. She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes, grateful even for the smallest opening. That night, as I watered my roses, I realized something profound. Forgiveness was not always about restoring what was broken. Sometimes it was about loosening the weight I carried, so it would no longer hold me down. Meanwhile, my daughter kept sending the payments, each one a reluctant acknowledgement that actions have consequences. We had no direct contact, and I did not seek it. I no longer needed her validation, her apologies, or her approval. The money gave me security. But the real treasure was peace. Peace in knowing I had stood up for myself. Peace in knowing I was no longer anyone's burden. A year passed, and my life became rich in its simplicity. I cooked meals from my own vegetables, hosted Jake and Emma when they wanted to escape the tension at home, and rebuilt a careful relationship with Dorothy. My daughter remained in the shadows, her presence reduced to monthly bank notifications and the whispers her children carried. And that was enough. On my 67th birthday, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a plain card with 4 words written in my daughter's familiar hand. I understand now. Sorry. I read the words twice. They carried no specifics, no admission, no true attempt to repair what had been destroyed. They were a ghost of an apology, drifting into my life far too late. I placed the card in a drawer and returned to tending my garden. Some things cannot be rebuilt, not because of anger, but because peace grows better in the soil of acceptance. I often think about the night I walked out of that grand dining room with my suitcase. Dismissed as useless and unwanted, in that moment, I thought I had lost everything. What I did not realize was that I was stepping into freedom. My daughter had tried to erase me, but instead, she forced me to find myself. I am no longer anyone's freeloader, anyone's excuse, anyone's disappointment. I am simply Belinda Thompson, living her life on her own terms. And now, I want to leave you with this: family does not end with blood, and respect cannot be begged into existence. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the table where you are no longer welcome, and set your own. My story is not just about betrayal and restitution, it is about reclaiming dignity, choosing peace over pretense, and realizing it is never too late to stand up for yourself. If this story has touched you, please remember to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose self-respect over family ties? I would love to hear how far this story travels and the lessons it sparks in your own lives.